On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being evenly divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative. The bill as amended is passed.
And just like that, Opportunity Zones 2.0 legislation is one step closer to reality. Earlier today, on July 1, 2025, the U.S. Senate passed H.R. 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill, 51-50. Vice President JD Vance had to break the tie, and now this bill heads back to the House for final passage before it goes to President Trump's desk for signature and enactment. Welcome to today's live episode of the Opportunity Zones podcast. I'm Jimmy Atkinson, and we're potentially just days away from enactment of Opportunity Zones 2.0 and OZ permanency. But how did we get to this point, and what is in this OZ 2.0 bill that was just finalized and passed just a few hours ago? Well, here's a recap, first of all, of what has transpired so far to this point. I'm going to share a LinkedIn post that I made over the weekend. This was, actually, this is the one I just made a couple hours ago, which shows the progress of the reconciliation bill so far, just to get everybody caught up to speed, because there's been a lot of votes, a lot of different things that have happened in Congress over the past several months. This all started, honestly, it all started with President Trump's election and the Republican sweep in November, and then with the new Congress getting seated, and with President Trump's inauguration in January, they quickly adopted some budget resolutions in the House and the Senate in late February of 2025. A few big events. The Senate approved the House HCon Res 14 in April, and then they moved on and finally started releasing some language of the tax portion of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act from House Ways and Means in May. This was our first look at what OZ 2.0 legislation would be, possibly, although the Opportunity Zones provision that were initially unveiled by House Ways and Means have changed considerably since then. But overall, it's still some great enhancements and renewal of Opportunity Zones policy. The House passed H.R. 1 under reconciliation on May 22, 2025. It then went over to the Senate. The Senate amended large portions of this bill, and in particular, for the purposes of this audience and this show, of note, they amended pretty substantially the Opportunity Zones provisions. So anything that the Senate passed doesn't then go to the president. It has to go back to the House, and the House has to agree with all of the changes that the Senate have made just today. Once it got to the Senate, we saw the Senate Finance Committee's first version of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and Opportunity Zones permanency on June 16th, just a few weeks ago. And then, in case you missed it, and you might have, because it just happened a few days ago, it happened overnight on late Friday night, June 27th, stretching into the wee hours of June 28th, 2025. The Senate released an amended version of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, including some key changes to Opportunity Zones, which I'll walk through in a moment. Later that night, almost a full 24 hours later, but still technically on June 28th, late June 28th, the Senate passed a motion to proceed to H.R. 1. They went through, first of all, they had to read out the full text of the bill, which took about 15 hours, followed by 10 hours of debate from Democrats. I think there were 1 or 2 hours of debate from Republicans also. So the full 20 hours that was allotted did not accrue all the way up to 20 hours before they started the vote-a-rama process early yesterday morning, which continued into this morning. It was a record-breaking vote-a-rama. Finally, internally in the Republican Party, they got everybody on board, or they had enough votes, I should say, to pass the bill, and they passed it by the narrowest of margins. 50-50 was the final vote tally, with Vice President JD Vance applying the tie-breaking vote, so 51-50. That happened today, July 1, 2025. Still to come, the bill is going to return to the House for a concurrent vote on the Senate's changes. There are a few options here for the House. They could also make amendments of their own and then send it back to the Senate. They could also enter into conference with the Senate and pass a new version of the bill that way. But those two strategies take time, and time is of the essence here. The Republican Party and President Trump in particular have been very vocal about wanting this to get passed as soon as possible, and they've put a somewhat artificial deadline, politically motivated deadline of the 4th of July for being when they want to target this bill getting to President Trump's desk. So with that said, the bill currently is in the House Rules Committee. They're meeting right now, or they were as of a few minutes ago before I went on. It'll go to the floor very shortly. It's expected it won't last in the Rules Committee very long. And then the House should vote on it within the next few days and possibly still be able to get it to the president's desk by July 4th. That is, if they don't decide, look, this thing needs some more changes, we need to amend it. That could drag out the process several more weeks, and then nothing's guaranteed. So I think the Republican Party is definitely of the mindset that they want to pass it now. So what I'm about to show you, what the Senate did, is likely to be the final version of the bill, although nothing's certain at this moment in time. But this is what happened just a few nights ago, Friday night, going into Monday, or going into Saturday, excuse me. First of all, for those who haven't been keeping on track of everything that's in the bill, I'll back up a moment and just tell you that the big thing that OZ 2.0 bill does is it makes opportunity zones permanent. It is a huge win for the Opportunity Zones program. It's a huge win for developers, for investors, and for communities all over the country. The latest version that was introduced just a few days ago and was eventually enacted, or I should say passed, there were no further changes to Opportunity Zones made during the Votorama period or this morning's proceedings. So this is the final version that we have. The two most recent changes are, one, there's no longer any decennial recognition dates. So there's none of this weird 10-year cycle. We still get new zones every 10 years, but there's not a decennial recognition date. Previously, there had been language in the statute that would have adopted a new recognition date every 10 years in years ending in 3. So 2033 would have been the next recognition date for everybody who invested up to that date. Then 2043, then 2053. Now what they're doing instead is there will be rolling 5-year deferral periods. So no matter when you invest, as long as you invest after 12/31/26, you will get a 5-year deferral period, which is incredibly helpful. It avoids future dead zone periods beyond 2026. There's also a much simpler revised step-up schedule. OZ investors are just going to receive a simple 10% basis step-up at the 5-year mark, and that kicks up to 30% for rural qualified opportunity fund investments. I think these are both great changes. So let's take a look and see what's happened here. The Committee on Rules is, let's see. Yeah, they're still meeting right now. That's where the bill is currently. So this is the final version of the bill. It's been posted to the House Rules Committee's website right here. Senate Amendment to H.R. 1, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, came over to the House just about an hour or so ago, I believe. And this is it. This is the final version that emerged from the Senate. It's an amendment to amendment number 2360. One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Let's see. I think we need to go to page, I forget which page it is, so I'll just do a search for it here. Live TV, folks. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for today's episode, so thanks for sticking with me here. So let me walk through the language. I won't walk through line by line, actually. I think I'll go to my presentation that breaks it down into simpler terms, but we can skim through this pretty quickly. Decennial designation periods, they're going to designate new opportunity zones every 10 years. The only thing that changed materially from what was announced by the Senate Finance Committee on June 16th are a couple of things. Let's see, all this stuff is still the same with regards to 1400Z-1, including 70% AMI, which I'll get to in a moment. Let's see, where is it here? It's It's the election. Here we go. Deferral of gain invested in opportunity zone property. So this is what changed. The year of inclusion changed just within the last few days. Year of inclusion, gain to which subsection A1B applies shall be included in gross income in the taxable year, which includes the earlier of either the day that you exit your QOF investment or the date which is 5 years after the date of investment in the QOF. So that's that rolling 5-year deferral period is what this is, which is relatively new. This was just introduced into the Senate bill late Saturday night, early Sunday morning. And then the other thing that changed was the determination of basis. This is new. Investments held for 5 years shall be, the basis of such investment shall be increased by 10% or 30% in the case of any investment in a qualified rural opportunity fund. So let's see. Let me go now to, actually, I'm going to read this comment here from Connie. Connie says, thanks so much, Jimmy, for being right on top of all this. Thank you, Connie. Thanks for coming. We are live here, so if you have any questions or comments for me about opportunity zones or this bill in particular or what's coming next, feel free to send a comment in during this episode through the live chat feature. Let's see. I wanted to go back to the screen share now. And let me walk you through this presentation here, which I'm still drafting in Canva. That's my app of choice for doing my presentations these days. This is new and improved legislative update for Opportunity Zones 2.0. Just been putting the finishing touches on this just moments before we went live here. This is adapted from a presentation that I gave on OZ Pitch Day a couple weeks ago, but a lot is new. So the Senate version of the bill introduced on June 16th, 2025, amended version of the bill introduced on June 28th, 2025, and then the final version of the bill passed 50-51 on July 1, 2025. Key provisions. Let me walk through each of these right now. Just to be clear, there is no extension of the current OZ 1.0 program. There was legislation that was introduced to extend the current program by 2 years. That legislation was introduced in prior sessions of Congress. No such legislation has been introduced in this session of Congress, I should make clear. So I get that question a lot, is what's happening with this deferral date for existing investors? There's no change. So if you are a QOF investor up to today, or if you're going to be a QOF investor at any point in time later this year or all through next year, 2026, your deferral date is still 12/31/2026. There's no change to the existing program. Okay, the biggest thing that this bill does is it makes opportunity zones permanent. That is new from the House version. The House version did not make opportunity zones permanent. The House version that was unveiled in late May and then passed in late May only had a renewal of the opportunity zones policy through 2033. So with the version we got from the Senate, from Senate Finance Committee on June 16th was a huge change to the program. And I think we should all be incredibly grateful that Senator Scott in particular and Senator Crapo were able to get that done, to make OZs permanent. It's a massive feat. It's a huge win for the industry, for investors, for developers, and for communities all over the country. Couple new things that were passed today by the Senate. I shouldn't say new, but new-ish. What is actually in the bill also includes a 5-year deferral, as I mentioned, and then a 10% basis step up. That applies for investments in qualified opportunity funds made after 12/31/2026. There is a line in the statute. I'll see if I can find it right now. Actually, I think it's paragraph 5 here, if I can scroll down past where all of this language is about 1400Z-2 effective dates, except as otherwise provided in this paragraph. The amendments made by this subsection shall apply to amounts invested in qualified opportunity funds after December 31, 2026. It's kind of funny because there are other parts of the bill, other parts of the opportunity zones provision of the bill where there are different effective dates. For instance, the sunsetting of the Puerto Rico opportunity zones happens on December 31, 2020, or I think it happens well, hang on a second. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but there's a few other things in here where the effective date is the date of enactment. I think Puerto Rico, the special rule for Puerto Rico does kick in either date of enactment or 12/31/26. Let's see. Here's another effective date. Paragraph 4 here, effective date. The amendments made by this subsection shall apply to areas designated under Section 1400Z-1 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 after the date of the enactment of this act. So this is applying to the subsection above, and the subsection above is for the designations. It's for 1400Z-1, which outlines which zones are eligible and what does the designation process look like. So that goes into effect sooner. It goes into effect date of enactment. I think the reason for that is because they are actually saying that the governors of each state need to start designating. The designation process starts on July 1, 2026. I think there's one or two other effective dates in here, which I won't bother looking for right now. But anyways, I've got a few more comments in here. I'll get to those in a moment, but a few other things I wanted to read through. Some other key provisions that made it through: expanded reporting requirements. And I haven't taken a good look at what the reporting requirements are yet. I wasn't sure if they were going to get through the birdbath and pass through the Senate parliamentarian, but they did. In 2017, similar reporting requirements and transparency provisions were initially included in the Opportunity Zones bill that made its way into the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But when the bill went through the process of being reviewed by the Senate parliamentarian, those reporting provisions were stripped out because of something called the Byrd Rule. The reporting requirements did not have a direct impact on taxes or spending, so they were stripped out. They rewrote the reporting requirements in such a way that it did have an impact on spending and taxes. So this time around, it survived the Senate parliamentarians' review, and now we do have reporting requirements, which we've been clamoring for since this was enacted in 2017, and now finally starting in 2027, at least, we will have those reporting requirements, which is great. I'll do an episode about those reporting requirements at a later date. A couple other big things. Tighter census tract eligibility criteria. This one's a big one. They changed the definition of low-income census tract. And I know that up until the final hour, Senator Tim Scott was trying to restore the original definition of low-income community. So here's what happened. In the original Opportunity Zones bill, the one that we're working with right now, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, in order to be eligible as an Opportunity Zone, you have to be a census tract for which the median family income of that census tract is no greater than 80% of the area or the statewide median family income. That threshold for OZ 2.0 has been dropped from 80% to 70%. And what does that mean? That means that areas now need to be even more low income than they were before. Also removed is the non-low income contiguous tract carve out. Each state got to designate up to 5% of its opportunity zones as non-low income but contiguous census tracts. So what does this mean? It's a pretty significant thing that they did here. They have tightened the definition of low income community, and it's going to result in about a 22% reduction in the number of opportunity zones that we see when they get designated at the end of next year and go into effect January 1, 2027. I did a big study on this a few weeks back. I'll see if I can find it and share it on my screen in a moment here. But I estimated, based on the latest census tract income data that I was able to find, which is the American Community Survey 5-year data ending 2023, it would result in there being 22% fewer opportunity zones. So going forward, the map's going to look different. There's going to be fewer tracts that are eligible, and there's going to be fewer tracts that are designated as opportunity zones. So that's something to keep an eye on. I know that, like I mentioned before, Senator Scott filed an amendment. I don't think it's been published on congress.gov yet, but I found it at the, I forget where I found it, atr.org is the name of the website I found on, I believe, atr.org, American Taxpayer Relief, I think, or something like that. I found it last night on that website. The amendment would have moved that number back from 70% and restoring it to the original 80% definition. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get it done. They weren't able to get it introduced. There was some issue with being able to pay for it because it was going to end up scoring too high, is what I'm hearing. But I haven't gotten any confirmation on that yet. And I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but I know that they were trying. They were giving their best effort to try to resolve that issue, but they weren't able to quite get it done. It all comes down to, at the end of the day, how much did this thing cost, right? And lowering the low income definition from 80 to 70 made the bill score a little bit lower, which is a good thing if you're counting, how much this costs. Okay, one last key provision, and then I'll take a break and take some questions from the audience because we've got a lot of questions coming in. There's also additional incentives for rural opportunities on investments. The bill creates a new type of qualified opportunity fund called a QROF, a Qualified Rural Opportunity Fund, or a CROF, as I'm hearing some people refer to it as. And if you are a CROF, that means your fund invests in rural areas. There's a rural definition that is stated in the statute here. I'll see if I can find it. I believe it applies to tracts that are not located in a town with here it is. The term rural area means any area other than a city or town that has a population of greater than 50,000 inhabitants, and any urbanized area contiguous and adjacent to a city or town described in subclause 1, which is 50,000 inhabitants or greater. So I don't know what those rural areas are actually going to look like. The definition they're using here, I think, is a little bit tricky. I'm not sure how they're going to crosswalk that back to a census map, but that's for someone else to figure out, I think. Let's see. So OZ investments in those areas will qualify for 2 additional incentives, one of which I've put on here on the slide. Instead of those investors receiving a 10% basis step up at the 5-year deferral mark, they will receive a 30% basis step up at that 5-year deferral mark. And then at the fund level, at the property level, at the qualified opportunity zone property level, the assets held by the fund, either directly or indirectly through a QOZB, the substantial improvement requirement for existing structures is typically 100%. You have to double the basis in the building. But for the purposes of a rural opportunity zone investment that's held by a qualified rural opportunity fund, that substantial improvement threshold is dropped from 100% to 50%. So much easier hurdle to clear. All right, now with that, I'm going to take a break here from my presentation, and then in a moment, I'll tell you what's not included in the current Senate bill, some problems with the Senate bill. As much as we love it, as much as we love the fact that OZ 2.0 is one step closer to reality, and it looks like it's going to become a permanent fixture in the tax code, there's a few things that we didn't get that we were hoping for. But let me see about I got a ton of questions here, so let's see. First one comes in from Richard. And Richard says, seems like the remaining major concern is the dead zone for QOZ investments ahead of 12/31/26. How does this still affect investments now in QOZs? Richard, you came right to it. The dead zone issue is still a very big issue. They did not address that. I know they were trying up until the last minute, and they just weren't able to get it done. And the issue is, for those who aren't aware, the dead zone is if you have a gain in 2026, you're incentivized to not invest in opportunity zones that year, but instead wait until 2027 and get into a better program and get a better deferral. You get a 5-year deferral if you invest in 2027. If you invest in 2026, you don't get a deferral at all. Now, in a minute, though, I'm going to address why I think there's still some benefit to getting in the OZ 1.0 program, and why, if you have a gain in 2026, you might still consider it. I think there's 3. I think that I've got 3 reasons why. Haven't scripted them out, but I think it's 3. So Richard, it is still a remaining concern, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. Let's see. Connie says, I know they would like to have the House just pass the Senate's version, but do we think there's any possibility that we could get the one change that would reverse the 18 months dead period? Connie, I think there's always a chance. I think there's a chance that the House doesn't want to pass the Senate version as is. I think what has been happening is that Republican leadership has been meeting with and staying in close touch with both Senate leadership and House leadership over the last several days. And they passed the version of the bill in the Senate this morning or early this afternoon that they did because they knew that they could get the House on board with it eventually. If for whatever reason they have too many holdouts in the House, then they will have to amend it. All signs indicate right now that the Senate passed this version of the bill because they think it can get through in the House. In fact, President Trump even said a couple hours ago, he thinks, for what it's worth, he thinks the House is going to be easier than the Senate now that they're to this point. So we'll see what happens, Connie. I'm not optimistic about the chance for any further amendments. And they can't just make that one little change because that does change the bill. And then it has to go back to the Senate again. They want to avoid ping-ponging this thing back and forth. Every time it goes back, it's more work and it's more time passed and it's a bigger risk that it doesn't happen ever. So the fact that it's halfway there now, it's out of the Senate and it's to the House is a pretty huge step that they just took today. They don't want it to have to come back to the Senate if they can avoid it. But that's a good question, Connie. All right, let's see. Durham NC asks, can you discuss more on the qualification for rural OZ? So I think this question came in before I shared on my screen that rural definition, but I'll just share it on the screen one more time. Again, a rural area means any area other than a city or town that has a population of greater than 50,000 inhabitants and any urbanized area contiguous and adjacent to such a town with that population. I don't know where these zones are. I don't know that this definition maps exactly onto the census map of 2020. I'll do an episode of this show in the future when I get such a map or have instruction on how to create such a map. But at this point in time, I can't tell you whether or not that tract is rural or not. Some of them, it's going to be very obvious. If you're in the middle of nowhere in South Dakota, let's say, I'll pick on them. You're probably in a rural zone. But I don't, if you're kind of on the edge of a town, I don't really know. I don't really know what, how it all shakes out, quite frankly. But thanks for the question, Durham. Let's see. We've got another question in here from Andrew. Andrew asks, if you have a capital gains tax event in 25, should you form a QOZF and aim for the OZ 2.0? That is a good question, Andrew. I would have to think about that. Would that be eligible? I guess I would pose this to the group. If you have a gain in 25, you can defer that gain into a QOF, maybe presumably in early 2026. And then that QOF has until 2027 to deploy the capital into OZ property. I guess at that point, see, this is where I'm not 100% sure, and we might need some regs from the IRS to provide guidance on this, or maybe somebody here has an idea of how this would work. The QOF in 2027 that was funded in 2026 with gain from 2025, does that QOF have to use the OZ 1.0 map, or could they use the OZ 2.0 map, or do they get kind of a mix of both potentially? I actually honestly don't know the answer to that question. I know at the current zones, the deferral date for the current program is 12/31/26, but the zones themselves don't expire until 12/31/28. The new zones come into effect 1/1/27. We're going to get a 2-year period of overlap with the map. And I don't know how that all shakes out. Andrew, that's a very good question. It's one worth considering. Maybe somebody here who's smarter than me about this can weigh in. I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head, though, Andrew. It's a good one. We're early days here trying to figure this all out. Let's see. Carl asks, or he just comments, really excited about OZ 2.0. It gives me the opportunity to start funding a QF. That's awesome. Thanks, Carl, for the comment there. Let's see. Al DeNicola says, is the investment timeline still 180 days from the capital gains realized? Yes, it is. They didn't change that at all. It's still 180 days. If your gain is recognized on a K1, I would imagine that the regulations around that will remain the same. And those regs from the IRS state a K1 gain, you have 3 options for when to start your 180-day clock. You can start it on the date of the transaction. You can start it on the last date of the calendar year in which the transaction took place, or you can start your 180-day clock on the date that the tax return for the pass-through entity is due, which is typically March 15th of the following year, which takes you out to September 11th of that following year. Which is really why if you have any type of eligible gain reported on a K1 in 2026, any K1 gain investors who have a gain in 26 has a choice of whether or not they want to go into an OZ 1.0 or wait until 2027 to defer that gain into an OZ 2.0 structure. I'll talk more about that in a moment here. Richard says, do you think the passing of this legislation will create more certainty for QOZ sponsors to get financing on their projects to provide investor return of capital to offset taxes? Well, it depends if they're able to get financing on their projects. I don't know. I mean, certainly the legislation provides more certainty on a few things. It provides certainty on, number one, there's no extension of this current program. So if you have the ability to return capital to investors so that they can pay their capital gains tax liability, the urgency is on, right? You want to make sure you get that capital back to them at some point in late 26 or early 27 so they can pay that liability. By the way, that's not promised by any fund, I don't think. A lot of funds projected that could be a possibility. It's not a requirement, but it would be a nice to have if funds are able to do some sort of distribution back to investors so that they can pay those tax liabilities. That'd be great. But really the burden falls on the investor to have the liquidity to be able to pay those taxes in the first place. The other thing that this bill creates certainty on is it creates certainty on the future of the program. I think a lot of investors, I'm thinking in particular RIA groups, family offices or multifamily offices, also a lot of practitioners, CPAs, attorneys, financial advisors, they may not have heard about opportunity zones until later in the program, maybe within the last couple of years, and they see, oh, I guess a couple of the benefits have expired already. Oh, the whole thing's going to expire in 2026. I'm not going to bother looking at it. I'm not going to bother spending any time, putting any resources behind this, getting anybody on my team into learning about this because it's going away in a few years anyway. Now that this is a permanent part, or I should say, now that this looks like it's about to become a permanent part of the tax code, remember, it still has a couple more steps that it has to pass. It has to get passed by the House, has to get signed by the president. But assuming that that happens, this becomes a permanent part of the tax code. You're not going to be able to ignore this anymore. As an RIA, as a family office advisor, as an RIA, as an attorney, as a real estate broker, as a CPA, as any other type of practitioner or high net worth investor, you'd be foolish to ignore this opportunity zones niche going forward once 2027 gets underway. So that's another thing that this provides is certainty about the program going forward. And I think this has the potential to make the program much, much bigger and better adopted by the general public. Okay, question here from Pete. Pete asks, do you believe the designated tracks in OZ 2.0 will have the same type of risk or more risk on average? Stems from the line reading, all contiguous tracks that are not low income will be removed. Pete, this is a great question. And then he adds, as well as tighter census tract eligibility. So yeah, that's a great point you bring up, Pete. And I think I'll use this as an opportunity to get on my soapbox about why I think somebody with a gain in 2026 might still be very interested in doing an OZ 1.0 investment and not waiting for OZ 2.0 to kick in. So So 3 reasons, if I can remember them, why you would not want to wait. Reason number 1 is the earlier you invest, the earlier your 10-year clock starts. And that's a good thing. And the more time that your investment has to compound. So just the timing is better. You don't have to wait if you can get in now. That's number 1. Number 2 is certainty about the map, right? If you have a gain in 2026 and you are thinking about waiting until deferring that gain into a QOF in 2027, well, the map of opportunity zones that starts on January 1, 2027, we won't know what that map looks like until pretty late in the year 2026. The designation period starts July 1, 2026. And if I recall correctly, in fact, I'm just going to actually see if I can pull it up in the statute right now. So bear with me for a moment because I want to get the timing right. It's the first section here. We'll walk through this together. I have a good point. Trust me here. So the determination date means July 1. So that is when the process starts for designating opportunity zones. Will be July 1 of years ending in 6. Let's see. Where can I find it here? Applicable start date. Okay, you know what? I think I'm having a hard time finding it. I don't want to waste too much more time on this. I think it was 90 days. Okay, you know what? I can't find it. So I'll just tell you this. I'll just cut to the chase here. The map of opportunity zones, we're not really going to be 100% sure what it looks like until late in 2026. So if you don't have a lot of certainty about what the map's going to look like in 2027, maybe that's an option for why you would want to defer your gain in 26 instead of waiting for OZ 2.0 in 27. One more reason is, I guess, related. This is the third reason, but it's related to number 2, is to Pete's point. If you are looking to invest in an opportunity zone in 2026, you're using a map that was created in 2018 with census data from 2015. That data is very old. A lot of those zones have improved significantly since over that period of time. For a lot of reasons. Maybe they were already experiencing an uptick in economic development or gentrification, as it's sometimes called, leading up to that designation that happened in 2018. And in addition to that, there's been a lot of development in that area since then, maybe because of the fact that it was designated as an opportunity zones. So in a way, you can kind of consider the year 2026 as your last chance to get in on very, very good opportunity zones. One case in point that I'll point out, this group is a client of mine. I'd like to point that out just for full disclosure, but Capital Square is developing in the Scotts Addition neighborhood of Richmond, Virginia. And it looks like at least 1 or 2 of the census tracts where they're developing are going to be ineligible for an Opportunity Zone 2.0 designation because of the fact that they've done such a great job in that neighborhood, adding thousands of housing units in that neighborhood over the course of the last 7 years. And that's really the entire intent of the Opportunity Zones program, is that these zones that have been designated are no longer zones after a certain period of time. So in 2026, that'll be your last chance to be able to get in on these communities that have already received a lot of benefit. They are, in the words of our commenter here, if I can find it, Pete, in the words of Pete, they are, potentially less risky than OZ 2.0 zones. Now, maybe there's more upside to be had by the OZ 2.0 census tracts, right? But you're starting from a much lower threshold of what is defined as low income. And if you start in 2027, you don't have the benefit of them having received any OZ capital to that point, especially if they're a brand new zone. I think you see my point there. There's a lot of reasons why you would still want to consider doing an OZ investment in 2026, getting into a zone where you know with certainty that it is a zone, and that you know with certainty that it has already received a lot of economic upside, and it's just a little bit less risky than potentially a new map. Pete, thanks for pointing that out, and thanks for letting me get on my soapbox, everybody. Let's see here. Let me see if I can find my next question. All right, I've got a few more questions. I'm going to work through all of them. Thanks for all the questions today. It's been a pretty fun day here, seeing this go through the Senate. Richard Rosselli says, so the trade-off for OZ 2.0 benefits is potentially higher risk from fewer census tracts. I would say higher risk from higher risk is probably right. Probably characterize the situation correctly. I don't know if it's from fewer census tracts, but just the census tracts you're looking at, there won't be any, the cream of the crop will be a little bit less creamy than the cream of the crop in the OZ 1.0 program. In the middle of 2018, July of 2018, basically 7 years ago this week, just about, was when opportunity zones were designated under this current 1.0 map. There were some pretty good zones there, right? I mean, there were some areas that frankly were head scratchers as to how does that qualify as a zone because of the higher low income threshold, 80% median family income compared to the rest of the area, and because they did allow for some non-low income contiguous tracts to be eligible. That resulted in some zones being designated zones that probably, especially for political purposes, probably shouldn't have. But under the rules of the program, they got in just fine. The cream of the crop for the OZ 2.0 map won't be quite as enticing, I would say. But it's also kind of hard to say that in a vacuum without really studying the map. I ran a report that showed that there would be 22% fewer zones going forward. I'm going to see if I can try to find it now. But I haven't really studied the map. I only really looked at state by state what the drop would be. And I did just find it. So I'm going to share this on my screen right now. So this was an article and an accompanying podcast episode that I ran just a few weeks ago toward the end of May of earlier this year. And I concluded that there would be 22% fewer opportunity zones if they use the House version of the bill, which has this new low income community definition. And it's the same, the Senate didn't change it at all. It's the same definition, 70% of the area or statewide median family income. And you can see there's a reduction in the number of zones in every single state, except for those states with very small numbers of zones where you get to automatically keep 25 census tracts that qualify for zone designation. Would like to point out Puerto Rico right here. This actually does drop considerably more now because the House version of the bill didn't explicitly do away with the special rule that allowed Puerto Rico to designate all of their low-income census tracts as opportunity zones. The Senate version of the bill did. The Senate version of the bill explicitly struck that special rule from the statute. So Puerto Rico is now treated like any other state. They're only able to designate 25% of their low-income census tracts. So as a result, they're going to have not 700-ish tracts, but instead 1/4 of that, which is, what is that? 175 roughly. Don't quote me on that exactly. But you can see how in this table here, the drop for every I should say for most states. For smaller states with a small amount of low income census tracts where they get 25 automatically, there's no change. Actually, I'm not 100% sure if that 25 rule is still in place or not. So I might need to double check that. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong about the 25 thing, if that maybe didn't get through this one or got changed. But some states had some pretty major drops. Iowa suffers a 37% drop in zones. Minnesota, 42% fewer zones. Ohio, Oklahoma, 20% each. Oregon, 34%. Where's California? California has the more zones than anybody else in the country. 879 zones on the current map. There would be 906 on the new map if they use the same definition, but instead they're using this new definition. Now there's going to be 686 zones. And then Texas, where I am, a lot of zones here also. There would have been 772 on the new map, but now there's only going to be 621, 20% fewer. You get the idea there. So nationwide, let's study this right now. And I'll tell you what each of these numbers mean. Nationwide, we currently have 8,764 opportunity zones all over the country. In the new designation period in 2027, we would have had over 9,100 census tracts. Why the jump there? Yeah, if we had used the same low-income community definition, why the jump? Simply, the population's grown. There's just more census tracts in the nation than there were previously. And there's been some changes, obviously, in the number of low-income communities as well. But instead of the 9,100, we're getting a reduction of, I would say, maybe not a reduction, a theoretical reduction, or over 2,000 fewer opportunity zones as a result. So a 22% nationwide drop from what we would have had to what we are instead going to get. We're going to get about 7,000 zones total. So that's the breakdown there. Now, some caveats here. One, again, this is not updated for Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is not going to be 701. It's going to be 175 instead. So that's a huge reduction. That's in part because of the new low-income definition, but mostly because they stripped out that special rule. So this is actually going to be more severe than 22% drop because of Puerto Rico. So there's a little asterisk there. Another caveat is this uses data that is probably different from what the Treasury Department will use a year from now when they have to provide a list to all of the governors nationwide of which zones, which tracts are eligible. I'm using 2023 ACS data. I'm anticipating that they will use 2024 ACS data. That will be available then. It will be the most up-to-date data that they can get. I think they might even use a different data set. In 2018, they used ACS data. I'm just assuming they're going to use the same thing. So these numbers aren't written in stone. Well, this one is, but I don't know about these other ones here. Anyways, that's enough of that. Let's go back to the questions, and then I'm going to wrap up with a final recap and get you guys all out of here in a few minutes. Let's see, where was I? I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to everybody's questions here. So let's see. Nandish asks, is OZ 1.0 grandfathered in? This is a scary situation? Yes, OZ 1.0 will be grandfathered in. So if you are an existing investor in an opportunity zone fund, your deferral date is still 12/31/26, but you still have that 10-year clock is still ticking. Likewise, if you are a qualified opportunity fund and you need to deploy capital into zones, the current zones are still in existence through 12/31/28. And then I wasn't 100% sure if they might be able to, starting in 27, deploy capital into new zones or not. Somebody smarter than me hopefully can answer that question, or I'll know the next time I go live anyway. Let's see. Nandish continues. Capital gains from 25 will fall under OZ 1.0. OZ 2.0 will be investable starting January 1, 2027, I think. That is correct. You understand correctly. So let's see. Moving on to the next one here from my friend Patrick Chagru. Says, the GOP holdouts in the House seem to be more spending/deficit hawks. Thus, I don't think the House will get rid of the 18-month dead period. Similarly, with the slim passing majority in the Senate. Thanks for that comment there, Patrick. That was in response to Connie's wish from earlier. Andrew says, thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Andrew. Richard says, if a gain, i.e. the sale of a business, can be scheduled to be done in installments, Would it make sense to try and schedule sales across QOZ 1.0 and QOZ 2.0? Boy, that's a good question. That would be something you'd want to consult with your advisor about. But yeah, there's a few different options for installment sales. I want to see if I can find it on the IRS website right now. Let's see, IRS Opportunity Zones FAQs. Because I want to. They've got a really good answer to this question here. Let's see, what options do I have? Okay, so I just want to clarify what we're looking at here. What are the options if you do an installment sale? Let's see. If you do installment sales, you have two options for how to defer the gain. First, you can choose to have a single 180-day period for making one or more investments into one or more QOFs. Or second, you can choose to have a separate 180-day period for each installment sale. Each installment payment. And such period begins on the date on which the installment payment is received. And Richard probably already knew that, but I was just refreshing my own memory and letting everybody else know what it was. So Richard is asking then, I think he's referring to that second choice where you can basically trigger a new eligible gain every time you receive an installment. Would it make sense to try to schedule those sales across, or I guess those payments across OZ 1.0 and OZ 2.0? I don't know. It depends on your risk tolerance. It depends on your investment goals. If you want to, I guess, I've never used this term before in context of QOZ investing, but if you want to essentially dollar cost average your gain across two different programs for diversification benefits, not a bad strategy, I think. Richard, is interesting thought there. I don't know if I have a clear answer to that question, though, but it makes sense what you're asking. Sherry asks, will the opportunity zones be updated or added areas with 2.0 version? Sherry, yes. There will be a new OZ 2.0 map using the 2020 census boundaries and using, I think, ACS income data from 2024. That designation period will start on July 1 of 2026 and will be finalized closer to the end of the year 2026. I was trying to find the exact language on the exact timing there. Wasn't able to find it live here a moment ago. But I think with potential extensions from the Treasury Department, if I'm remembering everything correctly, it could take several months before the map is finalized after the process starts on July 1, 2026. Connie asks, Jimmy, could you email to us all of the materials you have used today? Yes, I will. Connie, good question. I will do that. Then Patrick says, may be able to manage deferral of 26 gains by timely funding a QOF in 26, then incurring an inclusion event in 27 when the OZ 2.0 kicks in and a new 2.0 QOF investment. IRS may tag that as abusive, though. Yeah, Patrick, I've been getting this question or a related question quite a bit. There's a line in the IRS regs that specifically says you cannot perform a second deferral of a gain into a new QOZ investment. I can't remember the exact language. I'll try to see if I can find it. Let me see. Second deferral. I'll have to find it in my. I wrote an email to somebody the other day. Let me think of how can I find that quickly here. If I go to IRS final regulations, bear with me just a second here. Live TV, everybody, right? Second deferral. Was it subsequent deferral? Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to find it right now, but there was something, there was some line in the regs that does expressly prohibit that. And on top of that, I think you're right. I think it would be considered abusive anyway. Interesting thought, though. Let's see. I just have a couple more questions here. One more from Richard says, how many QOZ funds did development in Puerto Rico up to now? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think anybody does. Somebody at the IRS should know the answer to that. I know of a handful that have done some QOZ investment, but I don't know the exact number. How many public funds? Let's see. I'm thinking of who has presented on OZ Pitch Day. Island Paradise QOF has presented on OZ Pitch Day. Jose Torres has presented several times on OZ Pitch Day with his PROZ Fund 1, and now he's got PROZ Fund 2. So those are 3 different funds that I know of that are public and that we're raising capital from outside investors. My guess is there are many dozens, if not hundreds more, captive funds that were doing some sort of QOZ investment in Puerto Rico. That's a good question there, Richard. I don't know the answer. Richard says, thanks for the installment answer, Jimmy. You got it, Richard. Okay, I'm going to wrap up by going back to that presentation that I was sharing a moment ago and seeing if I can, here's the IRS regs. Let's see, I got to get back to this. I wasn't able to find, see, the word deferral appears in here 173 times. I'm not going to go through all those right now for you, Patrick, sorry, but let's see. Let's see if we can get through all of these. July 1, 2025 legislative update. For those just joining, here are the key provisions that were included in the bill that just passed in the Senate today. There's no extension of the current program, makes opportunity zones permanent, 5-year rolling deferrals for everybody, no matter when you get in, as long as your OZ investment happens after 12/31/26, 10% basis step up at the 5-year mark for everybody. That never expires like it did in the OZ 1.0 program, 30% basis step up for rural. Expanded reporting requirements made it past the Senate parliamentarian review, survived the bird bath, tighter census tract eligibility criteria, and additional incentives for rural OZ investments, including that 30% basis step up instead of 10, and substantial improvement of only 50% instead of 100. So what did not make it in? Again, there's no extension of this current program. There's that dead zone issue that I've spoke about ad nauseum a little while ago. I won't go through it again. Unfortunately, Senator Scott, despite his best efforts, and he did file an amendment to try to get this done, but I think it just ended up scoring too high and was not allowed. He was not able to restore the low-income community definition to 80% of AMI versus 70. A few other things we haven't talked about. There was some thought of allowing for investment of non-gains dollars, and in fact, the House version of the bill did allow for up to $10,000 of ordinary income to be deferred into qualified opportunity funds. The Senate removed that entirely. I thought that the House version of that was a little bit silly anyway. 10,000 is not a practical amount. I thought it should have either been a much higher cap of $100,000 or more, or just no cap at all. But I think that whole thing just ended up costing too much. So the Senate just removed it for some other better stuff instead, I would say. There's no feeder funds. QOFs are still not allowed to invest in other QOFs. There is no relief for interim gain reinvestment. It's still very difficult for operating businesses with tangible property to qualify. And there was also this thought about having some additional incentives for affordable housing or job creation. None of those ideas made it into this final bill. But overall, I would say, and especially if you had just told me 1 year ago, if you had told me 1 year ago that we would be at this point in time where we were very close to getting opportunity zones made a permanent part of the tax code, I would have been thrilled. And in fact, I am thrilled. I'm thrilled right now that this is a great bill. This is a great day. And opportunity zone, the opportunity zones industry, opportunity zone investors, opportunity zone developers, opportunity zone communities should all be celebrating this part of the bill because it is going to be a massive game changer for opportunity zones going forward. I think this program is going to get a lot more adoption starting in 2027, despite the fact that we might run into a bit of a dead zone issue in 2026. Although I still think there's some very good reasons why you might want to consider investing in 2026. I discussed those earlier. But overall, this is a great development for the opportunity zones industry, this part of the bill. That's all I have for today. Really want to thank everybody for joining me on this special episode of the Opportunity Zones podcast. I will be back again at some point in the future to discuss everything that's in the bill, maybe some further insights once it does come out of the House and gets enacted by the president. I'll have another episode. And in the meantime, if you liked today's episode, really appreciate you commenting on this show. Also, give us a thumbs up. You can like this episode by hitting that thumbs up button. That helps quite a bit. And please be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast listening app to always get the latest episodes. Thanks again so much to everybody for participating in today's discussion. There's a lot more still to come, but it's exciting days for the Opportunity Zones industry. I'm Jimmy Atkinson, and I'll be back soon with another episode of the Opportunity Zones podcast. Thanks, everybody.